one of the most important and most neglected aspects of the Docker building process when you want to build a Docker image is the build context. This section right here is defining the content that Docker is going to use along with your Docker file in order to create a Docker image. You can see right here when we say Docker build, we're specifying the name of the image that we want to build, and we're passing this little dot. This dot here represents the Docker build context. Now, as you can imagine, since we are executing this in this folder basics, and this is the content of the folder that we want to pass to the Docker builder, we are passing all of this as part of the building context. Now, this is really important because depending on the amount of files and the size of the files and folders that you have in here, Docker will have a really hard time trying to build your application. Since you are passing everything you have in this folder as the build context, you might have things in here that you don't want to pass to Docker whenever it's building your Docker image. For example, if you are working with a node application and you pass a dot here, you will be passing the node modules folder that is massive depending on the size of your application. You might also have some secrets or some folders that you don't want to pass to the Docker build context, so you want to remove them from the building context before sending the files to Docker. Under the hood, what's happening here, every time you pass the build context here, what Docker is doing is taking all the content of this folder, compressing all of this, sending this compressed bundle to the Docker builder. Then the builder is going to uncompress all of this and use everything as part of the build context. In Docker, we have one file that we can define in our Docker build context called dockerignore. You can see in this case, we are defining a file called .dockerignore. Here in the documentation, you can see that you can use this .dockerignore file to exclude files and directories from the build context. For more information, you can see the dockerignore file. In here, you can see that whenever you run the build command, the build client looks at the file called dockerignore in the root directory of the context. If this file exists, then the files and directories that match the patterns in the file are removed from the build context before it is sent to the builder. This is really important because you can use this file to remove files and folders from the build context before sending that to the Docker builder. For example, we could ignore all the files like these store files created by macOS. In this case, since we are testing our application and we are building the application, this file called application, that is a binary, is not needed for the Docker builder. So we can also ignore this file. If you are working with a node application, you could ignore the node modules folder from here. So you are going to remove this folder that is massive in size because you are going to create that folder anyway whenever you run npm install. So it is important for you to understand that you have this file dockerignore and you should have that file to ignore whatever you want to remove from the Docker build context. If we have, let's say, this gitignore file and we have another gitignore file in our basics, we could also ignore our .gitignore. So we're removing everything that we don't need from the build context and just sending exactly what we need to the Docker builder. In this way, you are sending only what you need and making it a lot easier, safer, and secure for Docker to build your Docker images.